As a child, Linda was considered strange in the yard because she wasn't afraid of dentists either. When other children were being dragged into the dentist's office by their parents with tantrums and faces red from crying, Linda was eager to peek through the narrow slit of the door and see what was going on in there. She wasn't afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets, or maybe because everything that was going on aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors and afterwards asked a million questions, flapping her naive, childish eyes. The sound of boron machines, the wonders of filling solidification, white coats. All this was an outlandish world for 8-year-old Linda. It was no surprise to anyone that after graduating from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All through high school, she prepared. Diligently, she learned chemical formulas and diligently solved biology tests. Sometimes Linda put on a white coat at home, a cap, and imagined that she was seeing patients. She had once borrowed a doctor's outfit from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local polyclinic. "And want you, Linda, in the teeth of other people's uncles and aunts to pick," sighed her mother, stirring the borscht in the pot. "But you want to teach cranky children." "Flipping through a book," replied the daughter. "I guess you're like your grandmother," the woman grinned, "only she was treating cattle on the ranch, and you decided to get to people." Linda grinned understandingly. Grandma Emma had worked as a zoo technician in the small town for a long time, until she retired. And even after that, she often came to check the condition of the animals at the request of her superiors and delivered cows in difficult labor. At the same time, grandmother was not shy to cover young graduates of the Veterinary Institute who had just arrived at the ranch and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach cows and horses from behind. When the ranch was disbanded, the tough-on-words elderly woman continued to be called by the local owners. So as long as the small town had at least a couple of cows, there was plenty of work. Emma lived like that, where she had worked half her life in a small town in Kansas. Linda's mom, Aunt Melissa, took a different path. She didn't want to live in a small town and went to a bigger city, hoping to fit in and achieve a rank above honorary milkmaid. However, the bigger town did not treat Melissa as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance further than a primary school teacher, but received in the last years of good work, a small one-room flat. The kind where the kitchen is already cramped for 2 people. It's where Linda was born and raised. No matter how cozy it was under her mother's wing. But at the age of 15, the girl thought about living separately. But no way. The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months, and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Linda was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, after such a prank, her mother did not start any new relationships. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by the holidays. And now Linda stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credit. But now the familiar outer wall seemed harsh and pressurizing, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. "You're not a sophomore." Someone touched her elbow. Linda turned around and saw a blonde girl with a pointy nose and strange, age-inappropriate, brightly colored hairpins. She looked like a sophomore. Linda opened her student ID. "Yeah, I'm in 2. "Cool." The stranger shone and clapped Linda on the shoulder. "Finally, I found someone. My name is Catherine, by the way." Linda. "Let's go find our group and office." Without waiting for an answer, Catherine pulled her by the arm towards the entrance. The classmate was probably the kick Linda needed to take the next step towards her goal. None of her high school acquaintances had applied to medical school, and she felt inarticulate. There was a sea of new faces around. Many had traveled from other states to study. Only a couple of times did vaguely familiar necks from high school flicker through the crowd. "I came from the state of Michigan that's 1,600 kilometers away," whispered Catherine on the pair. "Where are you from?" "I'm a local." I grew up here in the city, Linda replied. She didn't really want to be reprimanded in her first class, but her roommate apparently liked to talk. On the other hand, she needed to make new friends in the student body. Cool. I'd always wanted to live in the city, but my folks at the ranch wouldn't let me until I graduated. Catherine rolled her eyes. Linda stared blankly at her new acquaintance sunshine skirt, blouse, shoes that had been the trend in town last year, bright shadows and bold lashes. Apparently fashion was delayed in reaching other states. I want to be a beautician in general, because in our small town, no one knows how to take care of themselves. It's poultices, 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 poultices. It's horrible. Catherine snorted so loudly that she caught the teacher's questioning look. When the danger passed, she expressively poked a finger with acid green varnish on her eyelids and whispered, "And I'll be a makeup artist. I've already seen some success. I've made up all my girlfriends for the wedding." "Yes, I'm sure you did." Linda held back a smile, looking at the bright spots on the face of her interlocutor. The pressure, simplicity, and a certain naivety with which Catherine communicated both repelled and attracted at the same time. In her, there was no frosts of the big city as in her girlfriends. There was wooden, like a birch log, openness, inherent in all people from the backwoods. "What are you going to do? Give injections or run around as a nurse?" Catherine blew her fringes out of her eyes and stared questioningly at Linda. "I plan to specialize as a dentist. It's been a dream of mine since childhood," she replied. "Oh, well, you'll change your mind 10 times. Waved her hand. "What if you don't like it?" "It's difficult. Dentists them now as lawyers, pond. I hope it doesn't happen." Linda tried to write down the outline, while the restless Catherine poured her with questions. "Will you do the session by yourself or with assistants?" Catherine nodded conspiratorially at the teacher. "I'd like to do it myself. I'll teach. I'll try for sure." Linda had already realized that the chatty Catherine wouldn't leave her alone until she had no more questions to ask. Before the end of the class, the girl from the countryside had time to talk about how she had settled in the dormitory, about how her mother had packed her bales with things, about her nagging neighbors nagging that her shoes were uncomfortable, about the cute students from the parallel group. Discussed the hair color and outfits of all the girls sitting nearby. Even the color of the lecturer's shoes did not escape her keen nose. Linda's head was spinning, but the funny thing was that she wanted to keep talking to this strange lady. There was something about her that Linda was missing. When the class was over, Catherine suggested going to a cafe nearby, saying that she wanted to understand the difference between the cakes made in the city and those made in the countryside. Gradually, Linda and Catherine became such friends that even their teachers began to call them an inseparable couple. Calm, restrained Linda and the volcanic Catherine. Studying wasn't easy. Linda was warned about it, and teachers at school, and her mother. Medicine does not tolerate dilettantes, and students from the first year were driven mercilessly. Sometimes Linda fell asleep over the notes. Her head was swollen from the incredible amount of information crammed in. Early rising on the long road to the institute also exhausted her. But the main thing was that the childhood dream, even if slowly, but approached her. Catherine did not strain herself so much. She often read magazines on the pairs, could oversleep, and in general perceived going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. "They'll expel you after the first session." Sometimes said Linda, careless friend. "Oh, I just need this crust for a beautician." Catherine waved away. "But for a certificate you need to pass the exam, at least a C," braked her Linda. "I have enough knowledge for a C," confidently declared the fashionista from the backwoods. In fact, Catherine was not so lazy. She just had a different picture of the world. Instead of daily cramming, she preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer before forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her neighbors and used textbooks and methods to prop up the wobbly table in her room. Catherine was not lazy, and because she immediately began to look for some part-time jobs. More precisely, they found it themselves, that flyers to hand out in the dormitory. That's something somewhere to carry for a small fee. So by the end of the semester, she was invited to work evening shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop. Catherine brewed coffee a little better than the cleaner, but made eyes at all visitors and smiled at 32 teeth. She left good tips, which the girl used to buy cosmetics and new handbags. directness and simplicity from the backwoods of Michigan broke through where the urban was difficult. Catherine was not afraid to look silly, and it always played to her advantage. She had a goal, too, and the girl was just going about it in her own way. Linda and Catherine were always fun. She knew the latest gossip, kept a lot of funny stories, could quickly make up her friend in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Linda stood at the bus stop in the morning and waited for the bus. Several other people were crowding along with her. Time was running out, and the bus was still missing. The grannies behind Linda were getting louder and louder. In the end, a man in an old-fashioned fur hat and a briefcase couldn't stand it any longer and asked the driver of the next bus where the number 14 had gone. "They've all been abolished." He shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "Now you go to the center only with transfers." Rumors that the bus would be abolished had been circulating for a long time. But as it happens, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat cursed loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and began to hurriedly call a taxi. Linda realized that she would have to do the same to avoid being late. As luck would have it, the first class was a seminar with a very picky professor who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Linda gave away all her money, even scraped change out of the furthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, flopped down on the bench next to Catherine. "Where have you been?" "I was already thinking about how to get you off." She pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Linda complained, laying out her notebook. "I have no idea how to get here now. It's either a detour across the city or a taxi." "So you moved to my dorm," Catherine shouted at once. 5 minutes and you're at school. The main thing is not to forget to brush your teeth." Linda wanted to object, but suddenly realized that the idea wasn't so bad. And if she had to choose between getting up an hour earlier and expensive taxes, Catherine and the dormitory won either way. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Student room fees were ridiculous. She spent more on commuting from home, and she could go to her mum's for the weekends. "I just had a neighbor who moved out, so that, as they say, all the cards were stacked." Catherine theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. "You'll write an application to the commandant, and they'll move you in quickly." Linda nodded. The time that was spent on the road could be used for more useful purposes, studying, walking, and getting enough sleep. The superintendent was a little nagging when she gave her the papers. "What are you doing?" "You're a local. I need to settle non-residents." The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to settle in. The commandant once again looked at her with the look of a dog wanting to put a dog on a passerby in case of something, but there was no such thing. Eventually she accepted the application and told her the move-in date. As soon as they were out of the dormitory, Catherine squeezed Linda so tightly in her arms that she even squeaked. "Yay, yay, we're together now." Her mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The flat was cozy, but cramped. And that fact, alas, even a mother's love didn't change. "Don't eat anything bad there," Melissa admonished her daughter, putting towels and a new set of bed linen in her bag. "And don't drink. At my place." She shook her fist expressively, but rather jokingly. "Or that Catherine, your girl, will start to influence you badly," continued the woman. "She's fine." Linda defended her friend. "She's just peculiar." A few days later, on a day off, the girl arrived at the dormitory with her things. Catherine was already waiting for her, helped her to bring everything in, to settle in, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Linda had her own separate bed, her own desk, a wardrobe shelf, and a whole wall. All in all, it wasn't too bad. The main thing was that it was a couple of minutes from the uni, and the rest would get used to it. In the evening of the same day, Linda and Catherine were walking down the corridor and suddenly they were called. "Hello, girls." A student peeked out of a nearby room. "Hi, Johnson." Catherine turned and tilted her head to the side, like a magpie looking at a shiny bauble. "What do you want?" "Let's join us, because we, the female company, is not enough." The guy waved his hand invitingly. "We'll feed you, we'll drink you, we won't leave you offended. It's our birthday, after all." Linda tugged Catherine's elbow questioningly. That's Henry Johnson from third year. He's been after me since the beginning of term, she whispered back. He's not bad, but he's a bit of an oaf. And you want to go? Linda took another look at the boy who was persistently beckoning them to come. Why not? Catherine stared at her, puzzled. Tomorrow is Sunday anyway. There's no need to go anywhere. We'll sit, chat, all of us. Nothing to be afraid of. She turned to Johnson. All right, we'll be there soon, just wait. The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up and disappeared into the room. Linda hesitated for a moment, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Catherine in 6 months of school. Of course, she'd talked to her classmates, but it wasn't the same. And her old school friends came to visit less and less often and wrote shorter and shorter letters. And they didn't understand why they had to go to an institute on the other side of town. Catherine quickly combed her hair, changed from pajama trousers into jeans, found a decent t-shirt in the wardrobe. Linda didn't bother with that. She just tied her hair up. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin as a pole, but very hospitable. An old acquaintance beckoned and greeted the girls and introduced the company. This is David, the birthday boy, and his Lady Mary. This is Alex, the future of urban medicine. And this Henry jabbed his finger at a boy sitting on a chair by the window, is Ray from the journalism department. The girls were warmly welcomed and seated at the communal table. After a while, the shyness of acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone was drinking, eating, joking. Mary suggested a game of crocodile. The boys readily moved the bed and, making room, Linda stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Henry was making small talk with Catherine. It was obvious he liked her. He was trying to put his arm around her, brushing invisible dust from her shoulder, scratching the back of her head. David and Mary had been together for a long time. It was obvious from their communication and warmth towards each other. A note of distant envy even ran through Linda's mind. She had dated a guy in high school, but he had never treated her with the care and warmth that these two did for each other. Alex made occasional jokes about doctors. During breaks when his mouth wasn't full of food, he'd already put a couple of ketchup stains on his t-shirt. But would that stop a man with a big appetite? Ray was the only one Henry introduced differently than the others, and he didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with a plate in his hands. But that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, he joked, he asked provocative questions, he posed picturesquely. Ray's a talker, David snorted. He's a man who's chosen his profession to scratch his tongue. I'd rather scratch my tongue than pick at people. The journalism student made a theatrical grin, which immediately caused the company to laugh. What's wrong with helping people? Linda suddenly asked. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Ray also looked at the guest. Well, you're not going to help them for free. Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society? He sarcastically teased Linda. I want to help first of all. I go into the profession by the call of my heart, not because it is profitable, said the girl. You need to eat, don't you? So stop covering your ambition with charity. Ray waved his hand at her. Sooner or later, people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will make money by talking, and some will see rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body. Ray, come on, this is the 3rd year you've been arguing with us. All professions are needed and all have their talents. David said conciliatingly, let's have a drink and play cards. Linda gave Ray an irritated look, but didn't argue further, so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Ray had the typical smarmy looks, chiseled features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversation blurred and the tension it had created went away. The party had passed midnight when there was a knock on the door. Sugar, David hissed, the commandant's here. Before Linda knew it, the table was covered with a sheet. Mary and Alex were tucked under one bed, Catherine and Henry under another, and she and Ray were shoved into the wardrobe. It all happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding David in a half-toned voice for the noise and mess after lights out, while he did his best to demonstrate the supposedly empty room. And so it was, every time. Ray sighed in Linda's ear, Why don't you just pay your aunt a wage? He'll hide us in the cupboards, you idiot. The wardrobe was cramped. Linda felt her back against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was lashing out. Ray gently touched her shoulder, as much as he could do while standing in a wardrobe full of clothes. You'll have to excuse me, okay? It's my nature to pick things apart. That was rude. Without turning round, Linda replied. She could feel the guy's guilty, if guilty, breath on the back of her neck. It was getting stuffy. Let's go out tomorrow, and as an apology you pick where you want to go. Ray put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last of her nagging remarks, wagged her finger at David, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down his body, hot and cold at the same time. The tension was back in the air, but lingering, enveloping. Let's go, Linda agreed, to the exhibition of contemporary artists at the gallery. All right, I'll be waiting at 17 at the dormitory. The wardrobe doors swung open. Why aren't you two fighting? David chuckled. Almost. Ray was the first to jump out, winking discreetly at Linda. You all right? Why did they put you and that jerk in there? Catherine clucked, giving the boy a stare. I think we're going on a date with that jerk. Linda whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. Linda, you have golden hands. The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Linda took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. It was for moments like this that she had gone to the dentist's office, for grateful looks and sincere appreciation. And she didn't regret the years she'd spent studying. First 5 in medical school, then residency for another 3. Paperwork for the registrar's office. A dressing gown to take home to wash. So what else? Catherine to call. They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Linda threw on her coat, said goodbye to the girls at the reception desk and hurried to the shop for a cake. Catherine had still had a sweet tooth since uni. No one was home to see her yet. Ray warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. He'd started moonlighting there while he was still at school, and 7 years later he'd taken the editor's chair himself. But Ray had connections with every authority in the city, from vegetable stalls to the prosecutor's office. They were married in college, a year after the relationship and that dorm room meeting. Catherine had convinced her that Ray was good, of course, but he was dapper and pays her. Her mother didn't take the journalism profession seriously. What kind of work is it to gather gossip? Like plowing in a factory or sowing grain, that's a job. She snorted when Linda came to visit at weekends and raved about her boyfriend. Ray was not what he seemed at first glance, nor was he what everyone else saw him as. He could be caring and sensitive, and even restrained his desire to pick at everything. At the same time, remained the soul of the company, a noisy lighter. Many girls openly envied Linda and openly glared at Ray when they appeared at the institute. There's nothing to see here, Catherine waved her hands at them. You're not here for the ballet. Shoo. Although she had initially opposed Linda and Ray's relationship, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace of mind and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, she told the guests that without her the young people would not have met. It might have seemed that Catherine simply had nothing to do. But how wrong were those who thought so? The backwoods fashionista had affairs with 2 or 3 at a time. Never a dull moment in the evening. Sometimes she chose from several candidates and was not ashamed to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve suitors. So Catherine finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She did not go to any residency and settled in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup, hair, and other beauty procedures. From boredom, or from flightiness, married and 6 months later divorced. Another year fluttered on dates and married again. Catherine wasn't lazy, she was just lucky. She was also never shy about doing things that others disapproved of. That's why she won where others failed. Linda sometimes thought that her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps for miles ahead. Catherine's road, on the other hand, wiggled like a snake and pitted or went under the clouds. The important thing was that eventually they both ended up with a destination. The tea was getting cold. Linda was already thinking of calling her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a fuss in the entrance and a call. "Can you believe it, you bastard?" The client was late. She held me up. Then the taxi was still running. Catherine started to get indignant. Linda only smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been any other way. In the past few years, Catherine had changed from a strange backwoods girl with ambitions into a genteel city beauty. She had a bob haircut, was always wearing makeup and fashionably dressed. And she was more concerned with a new skirt and going for a massage than having groceries at home. "Oh, you cooked for Ray." Catherine, barely passing into the kitchen, immediately stuck her nose in the pots on the cooker and in the fridge, and she has borscht and stuffed cabbage and compote. Linda did not chase after brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply. But she knew how to keep things cozy and on time. "Harry's nagging at me because I don't cook," Catherine complained. "Everyone has their talents," Linda reassured her as she poured tea. The friendly chat went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over and Linda was making coffee for the third time when Ray finally came home. The young editor was disheveled and twitchy. He came into the kitchen to say a quick hello, hugged his wife and retired to his room, saying he'd had a hard day. "Why is he so sour?" Catherine asked, after a glance at the man. "He must be tired." Linda shrugged her shoulders. "I can't force him to sit down at the table." Come on. Catherine jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. "What is this?" She picked up a red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the stunned Linda. She stopped in surprise. Maybe it was an accident? "Yeah. Say it was blown in by the wind. I'm a friend of men. I know them like the back of my hand. He came in tired, with someone else's hair on, and he's working hard, poor man." "What are you implying?" "That he..." Linda looked round the room. "I'm not implying anything yet, but I have the fact on my fingers." Catherine shrugged her shoulders. "We need to watch him. Think back. Maybe you had something strange going on." Linda thought about it. Her friend's suspicions had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress just a little, but it was enough to make the building shake. Ray had replaced in Linda the father she had been deprived of. He became both friend and husband at once. The first years they lived soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if a whole universe was formed in the merger of 2 dissimilar characters. Then they experienced several crises in their relationship. There were quarrels, as with everyone, but they quickly became the past. For the last year they lived a very measured relationship, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they started to socialize less. "Is everything okay in bed?" Catherine questioned her. "Well, maybe because of the work became a little less." "Yes," agreed Linda. "Yes, what are you bothering at all? There is one hair, and already panic." "Her hair is where it all starts." Catherine raised her finger authoritatively. "I advise you to go through his pockets, sniff his shirts and his laptop too." "I'm not going to sniff his shirts. What's the big deal?" Linda was indignant, although subconsciously doubts were already clinging to her. "And also go to his workplace. Maybe they have a red-headed student trainee there," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. Catherine said in a conspiratorial whisper. They chatted for a while and Catherine went home. "Yes, Lindochka, I almost forgot. My salon will celebrate the anniversary of the opening. Come with Ray. You're my regular at the Willow and Bath Cafe next week, Friday." "We'll come." Of course, Linda nodded. "Smell the shirts." Catherine winked at her, sent her a kiss and disappeared into the lift. Involuntarily, but Linda began to look at her husband. Until Catherine's words, she had never thought to accuse him of cheating. Of course, this fact was vaguely believable, but still. One evening, Linda went through her husband's things. "God, what am I doing?" she asked herself when she actually sniffed the collar of Ray's favorite shirt. It didn't smell suspicious, and there was no hair either. Linda calmed down and put Catherine's words out of her mind. Catherine is Catherine, and her Ray is not like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with loads of people in a day. Whoever her husband might have had a meeting with. It's all nonsense. Ray, we're all right, aren't we? Linda asked on the way to the cafe. She didn't know why she asked. The inner restlessness hadn't completely gone away. Ray turned to her. Yes, why are you suddenly asking? Why am I asking? Linda wondered. You can't tell me Catherine found the hair. You've been away at work lately. We don't talk much, she said. Lindochka, you know that I have a lot of things to do and responsibilities every day. Soon I'll get an assistant and relax a little. Ray smiled at her. Oh, here we are. Catherine was already waiting for them at the entrance. Apparently drunk and in full battle color, she was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought a small share of the business from her, so she could invite anyone to the party. Linda sometimes wondered where the careless Catherine got the money for such a thing, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men, the owner's husband, the masseur's boyfriend, and Linda's and Catherine's husbands. Linda didn't know her friend's new husband. She had only seen him at the wedding and couldn't remember where he had come from. Harry looked frankly bored, constantly attached to glasses of champagne, sighed, and very sluggishly participated in the general celebration. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Linda successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. The only person outside was Catherine, who was on the phone. Have you seen Ray? Her friend asked her. Catherine put the machine away in her purse. Linda, while you participated in the raffle, your husband doused his trousers with wine and went to change, she shouted. And we, came delivery of new manicure tables. Idiots, they mixed up the days. I'm going to go to the salon to get them so Miranda doesn't freak out. Ciao, Linda. I'll be right back. Have fun. Catherine jumped into a taxi and sped away. Puzzled, Linda dialed Ray, who confirmed that he had doused his trousers, would change and be back soon. Miss me? She heard a voice from behind her. Harry emerged from the doorway. Linda answered it automatically. No. They said hello very crumply for the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and left so hastily. Let's talk, shall we? I don't know anyone here but you, and there's nothing to talk about with these chickens from the salon. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors. He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. Come on, Linda agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. Harry asked about his work, his habits, his studies, but only when he was talking about himself. He complained about Catherine, either explicitly or implicitly. Linda realized he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone in such a way about her friend, as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. She cooks once a week, and then some rubbish that's impossible to eat, and I'm used to home-cooked food. My mom was a cook all her life, Harry sighed. You work here from morning till night. You want borscht, tea, cutlets, pies, and she'll buy salads or dumplings, dear. Ugh. But she puts on makeup for 3 hours. Why did you get married then? Cautiously switching to you, asked Linda. She's beautiful. She's so beautiful. You can't take your eyes off her. When I saw her, everything, the veil covered my brain. But now you realize that you can't eat beauty alone. Harry finished smoking, moved closer and whispered. And I gave her money for a share in that damn salon for some reason. I thought she'd stop hanging around there herself. She'd be home to manage and earn an income. No way. Linda suddenly felt sorry for Harry. She realized that his rose-colored glasses had shattered inside. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married, and on the other hand, beauty had always fooled men. I'd like a wife like you, Linda, a calm, responsible, homely woman who's ready to raise children. Not plaster chickens in front of the mirror, Harry said, looking into her eyes. Linda was taken aback and pulled her fingers out of Harry's hands, which he had already managed to grab. I don't think that's a good idea, the girl cut him off. We should have gone back inside a long time ago. She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically, her head was full of bewilderment and shame, her ears were ticking. Linda sat down in her seat at the table. and poured half a glass of wine. "Shall I tell Catherine what happened?" the complaints, Harry and the fat hints. "She'll start questioning him. They'll have a fight, have to stir it all up again." "No, let them deal with their own problems and each other." Linda took a swig of her drink and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach, and she wanted to hug Ray, but he had disappeared. She phoned. Her husband said he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic, and finally he walked into the cafe in jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, a panting Catherine burst in, desperately arguing on the phone with someone. "What kind of idiots are these? This is not a company, this is a quiet horror. Not only did they come on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me." She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. "I'm sorry it took so long." Linda Ray hugged her from behind. "The traffic would drive you crazy." "Why didn't you warn me?" Linda asked the girl. "I was standing in the middle of the hall with, pardon me, wet trousers. I don't have time to talk. I hurried to the car and rushed to change my trousers." Ray waved his arms guiltily to the sides. Nearby, Catherine continued to make noise and indignation. Linda calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand on her arm. On the other side of the table sat a silent Harry, glaring at her through the wall of a clear glass. A few days passed. Linda was finishing up her work at the clinic. She was in a good mood. Her last 8-year-old patient had been a delight to her with his bravery and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye. And under his mum's proud, embarrassed gaze, he said, "Thank you." Of course, Linda could not just let the little hero leave the office, and handed him a brand new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. "Linda, help me out." Catherine's voice came through the phone. "Come as a model. My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick, the bastard." "Now?" Linda was surprised. "Yes, it's urgent." Catherine begged. "Okay, I'll be right there." The girl hung up the phone. Linda often helped her friend. It was not difficult and pleasant. After all, she always came home with beautiful makeup and styling, and Catherine's training was not disrupted. It took Linda about half an hour to get to the salon. She was already waiting, sat in a chair, and under the popular tracks of the radio airwaves, Catherine and her student began to work. The girlfriend was scattered in another round of thanks and scolded the irresponsible model student who didn't show up. When the work was done and the student went home, Catherine suggested that Linda stay and have a cup of coffee. It turned out very well. Catherine looked at the makeup and said, "She's a smart girl. Maybe something good will come out of her." Linda clapped her eyelashes theatrically, turning one side and then the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure tables. Linda wouldn't have confused them. She'd been to Catherine's workplace so many times she'd already memorized how the tables stood and on which one, how the light from the window fell. "I thought you said you were going to replace the tables." She stared questioningly at her makeup artist friend. "Where are they?" "They turned out to be defective. We sent them back." Catherine waved her hand. "What, all at once?" Linda wondered. "They all had scratched tops. I told you, idiots. Those movers were pounding them against each other like crazy." Catherine brushed the shadow off her friend's cheek with a brush. "Only spoilt our holiday in nerves." "Did they hit you with the tables too?" Linda nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. "Yeah." Catherine didn't even look at her arm. "They opened the door as if it were their home. And I got bumped for company." The friends were finishing their coffee and had long ago switched to another topic, when Catherine, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly jumped in. Linda looked. She shoved a machine with a picture open on the screen to Linda's nose. The girl looked at the picture and hesitated. The photo was of the entire staff of the agency where Ray worked. The guys were with some certificates in their hands, apparently another award from the big shots. But another interesting thing was that a young red-haired girl was standing next to Ray. "Aha!" Catherine shouted triumphantly. "I told you so, I told you so." I told you so, Linda said, looking at the photograph. I felt sick to my stomach. The nasty feeling from her conversation with Harry and the homespun excitement of finding the red hair again. It's okay, Linda, we'll expose him. Catherine clenched her manicured fingers into a fist, if anything. You'll be the first to file for divorce. What divorce, Catherine? Linda jumped up like a flaming rock. It's not even clear yet. It's as clear as day, dear. Your friend folded her arms authoritatively across her chest. Your ray's gone off and we've got to go over there and pull that redhead's hair out. Right. Linda clenched her hands on her temples. I don't believe in this nonsense. Okay, Catherine agreed. Watch him very carefully this week. Men always get caught up in the little things. I will. Linda nodded. She was tempted to give Catherine a hint about Harry's behavior, but she didn't. Resentment could make a mess of things, especially since Catherine was just drawing her own conclusions. A little obsessively, but for now there was no one to take offense at, and nothing to take offense at. Ray was on his usual behavior. Linda, teased by Catherine's confidence, began to surreptitiously watch her husband, something she usually never did. Linda, until that day, had thought that there was no point in restricting the freedom of a partner, forbidding something, scandals or jealousy scenes. She had realized this when she was still a student, although she loved Ray very much, admired him as a man, as a human being. The more control, the higher the probability of the opposite effect, and to arrange emotional swings with a choleric sanguine like her husband, a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions to that was enough at work. At home wanted to be calm. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor is a chameleon to adjust to anyone who got to his office, and in the evening, at home wanted to be himself. Feeling like a delinquent schoolgirl, Linda rummaged through her husband's rucksack, his notebook, while he was in the shower. She found a list of phone numbers and women's names on the pages of the notebook and a strange pink-colored pen in his jacket pocket. Her heart pounded, thudding in her ears, as if it had been covered with a bucket. Linda, what are you doing? Ray stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in amazement. The girl froze with the evidence she had found in her hands. Are you accusing me of something? The man folded his arms across his chest. What is it? Linda jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. These are the candidates for the assistant position. The man shrugged his shoulders indifferently. I interviewed them last week. I put them all here. Why? Did you use this? Linda waved a pink girl's pen in the air. First my own. Then I ran out of paste and Kira lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff? Ray looked round at the slight mess on the desk. Nostrils dilating, Linda felt like a fool. She mumbled something under her breath, slipped the notebook and pen to her husband, and went into the kitchen. His explanations were very convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way into her thoughts. Linda squeezed her temples with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Catherine about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and suggested that she follow up with him to be sure. Linda looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back. Come on. Linda went to bed late. Ray was already having his 10th dream when she finally settled down. Before that, she stared at her sleeping husband's face for a long time, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented her. In the morning, she pulled herself together, pretended that nothing had happened, walked Ray to work, and waited for Catherine. Her friend arrived just as Ray drove out of the yard. You ready? Catherine's voice had a poorly concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. Do I have a choice? Larissa looked at her as she buckled her seatbelt in the car. Well, you might not like what you see if you see anything. Catherine corrected herself, shrugging her shoulders. But I'd rather not see anything, of course. He's a little distant, Linda murmured as they caught up with Ray on the road and pulled a few cars ahead of them. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. That's how it starts, Catherine nodded, looking down the road. First they get cold feet and then they start lying. Our feminine instincts can't be fooled. Did your previous husband cheat on you? Linda suddenly blurted out for some reason. Katya jerked slightly at the wheel, so surprised by the question. Bill might have cheated, she said uncertainly, but I didn't care anymore. I went out on a date, and I realized I was sick of Bill. Yeah, I felt sorry for him. I didn't tell him, and when he got bored, I filed for divorce. Aren't you afraid that Harry might cheat on you? Linda barely restrained her impulse to spill the truth. Harry? Please. Catherine waved her hand, instantly relaxing. He's in love with me like a dog, always waiting for me. He's not that in love. Linda muttered under her breath so Catherine wouldn't hear. They pulled into the car park outside Ray's work. His car was already there. It was going to be a long ambush. Catherine promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and scones. It took until lunchtime to doze in the car. Catherine nudged Linda in the shoulder as Ray came out of the agency with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got in the car and got ready to drive out. Let's go, lovebirds, we'll get them now. Catherine muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Linda watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl in the photo. Ray had said it was his assistant, but was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion drove down to the city utility into the stationery shop. On the whole, there were no provocative moments, except for the opening of the door. The girl carried a folder of papers, occasionally asking Ray something or answering the phone. He hardly ever took his eyes off the phone, even when he was driving. Yeah, he's holding the door for you. Catherine's eyes widened when she noticed her friend's husband's gesture of kindness. Almost always, Linda replied, following Ray with her eyes. Look, why don't you call him right now, Catherine suggested. Ask him what he's doing and see what the answer is. Linda dialed the number and waited. Ray's phone was busy, but he switched calls almost immediately and picked up. Hi, did you pick up lunch? She blurted out at his hello. No, I'll eat in the canteen. Don't worry, her husband replied in a completely calm voice. All right, Linda stretched out. How was your day? I'm traveling for work. And why are you calling? No reason. Linda sensed that her husband suspected something. I'll see you tonight, bye. Catherine listened to this conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She waggled her eyebrows expressively, hiding. That's right. Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Linda's chest. Why the hell does he even need an assistant? Catherine clasped her hands together. Somehow he's been working on his own for 2 years, and nothing. And now all of a sudden, the ambition of the head of the brain. I don't know. Linda was staring out the window. Tired, I guess. Yeah, from work or your wife. Catherine snorted. Let's go home. Are you drinking white or red? In the evening, Ray found the 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Linda couldn't get Catherine out of the house for about an hour. She was asking for a drink. She was hugging. She was hugging. She was losing something in her bag. Eventually, Harry arrived and took his rambunctious wife himself. He cast a glance at Linda, full of interest and question, and they left. Now her husband seemed to Linda the best and most innocent of men. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow and whispering something to it with just her lips. Ray sat in the chair and waited for his spouse to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her, only set the alarm clock, put a couple of loose pills on the table, and put a glass of water. Then he went out, standing on the threshold of the room as if in doubt, but the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man glanced at Linda, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. Linda became nervous and twitchy. She began to be late for work. For the first time, she snapped at a patient who traveled to her from across town. Linda, maybe you should take a holiday? Sympathetically asked the admin girls at the front desk. Maybe I will, replied the doctor, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She began to notice a cooling in her and Ray's relationship. He hugged her dryly, he forgot the usual little things, or he dropped her calls and called her back. Linda remembered the way the other female students looked at him during their studies. Ray always stood out. He was stately, charismatic. had a great sense of humor and a sharp mind. Next to him, she, no, but felt sometimes that she was falling short. Over the years, Ray had not lost any of his appeal, and even became even brighter. You've got a payday today. Go to the shopping center, buy yourself something, a dress, shoes, and your mood will improve, advised Linda. It was a good idea. In this turmoil, she had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer, and she didn't have to be cramped with stupid jeans and notorious t-shirts. Linda called Catherine and suggested that they go shopping together after work, but her friend said she was busy and refused. In the shopping center, the windows were full of sale posters. Mannequins towered between the rows of clothes. Linda remembered what trousers and styles of dresses Catherine had advised her the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting room. What a nice surprise she heard behind her when she came out to assess her outfit in the large mirror in front of the booths. Linda turned around and saw Harry. The man had wandered into the mall, apparently for the same reason she had to update his wardrobe. Well, what a surprise. Linda grumbled, "Hello, Harry. The dress fits perfectly." He gave her a thumbs up, "Don't even think about it." This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. The old memories that had come alive with his appearance slid unpleasantly down my back. "Linda, I wanted to apologize," Harry began, putting his hands behind his head shyly. "I got drunk in that cafe out of nervousness and fatigue, talking rubbish. I'm sorry, I acted like a complete prick." Linda was surprised, pleasantly surprised. "Okay, it happens. What are you doing here?" She glanced round the shop, as if confirming the question. "I closed a nerve-wracking deal at work, exhaled, and decided to buy something I'd been wanting for a while." Harry nodded at the bag from the hardware shop, and the new jeans are a bonus. Linda looked at the jeans appraisingly. "You take them too, don't think twice." She smiled slightly. Even this sudden company in the form of Harry was somehow to her liking. Maybe it was a distraction from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. "Catherine's all worked up, and she won't come with me," he said as they left the shop. "Me too, she's busy today," Linda confirmed. "How about a coffee?" Harry suggested, "or was there something else you wanted to buy?" Larissa thought that the lingerie shopping would have to be postponed, and nodded in agreement, approving the idea of coffee at the checkout. At the cafeteria checkout, she dashed over to pay herself, but Harry was the first to arrive and put a flavored drink and a small dessert in front of her, the latter of which Linda hadn't ordered. "Oh, come on. As the husband of my best friend." Harry waved his hand, "We're practically related." He didn't get a chance to say anything before he heard a text message from the bank. "What was that for?" Harry stared sourly at Linda, looking at the balance on the card. "Almost, but not relatives." The girl commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, choosing one pretty thing or another. Linda sensed that Harry was enjoying himself with her. He didn't turn on that whiner in the cafe anymore, but was cheerful and somehow relaxed at the same time. He talked about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminiscing about old friends and years of schooling. There was even room for a story about his childhood and Harry's fun holidays as a first grader in a small town. Listening to all of this, Linda did the most important thing. She took her mind off the intrusive thoughts of her husband's outings. She had to get home. It was nearing evening and Linda hailed a taxi as they stood at the entrance to the shopping center. "Thanks for the company at the mall," Linda smiled as the car pulled up. "Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we can do it again sometime?" Harry opened the taxi door for her. "It's probably not the right thing to do," Linda hesitated. Harry gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, "Well, you're a big girl. It's time you prioritized what's right." Linda drove home dazed, outraged, and flattered, a rattling mixture of all the emotions of the last few days. Resentment towards her husband, worry about their private life, irritation, and into all of it sprinkled sparks of innuendo from Harry. It wasn't right. It wasn't nice that she was having coffee with her best friend's husband, who was making ambiguous hints to her for the second time. Why? Well, of course she knew why. She knew that she loved Ray. She knew that she valued Catherine as a friend and loved one, and she knew that she wasn't ready to go for what Harry was veiledly offering her. All plain and simple. But then why is she flattered by his attention? Is it not compensation for a grudge from Ray? How long has it been since he spent almost half of his day off with her? The more Linda thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her into the wilds or to an unpleasant crossroads. Tomorrow I'll talk to Ray straight, Linda decided, and I'll tell Catherine the truth about her husband. That'll be the right way to prioritize. The next day, Linda had few patience, so she got off early after work. On the way, she received a call from a nervous Ray, asking her to bring the work phone she had forgotten at home. On the way, she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Catherine's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily sang into the phone about her agreement and even asked if she should dress up. "No, we'll just sit around," came the reply. As Linda entered the flat, she heard Ray's work phone ringing. She picked it up from the mirror in the hallway and glanced absently at the screen. There were about 10 missed calls. "Will computers? Information bridge," Linda mumbled, flicking through the screen on her smartphone. She was already getting into a taxi when a text message sent around 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. "I missed you, my affectionate boss. Looking forward to tomorrow." Linda felt as if she had been splashed with cold water. There it was. Her suspicions, here in her hands on the screen of her husband's phone. Tears welled up in her eyes, her nose stung, and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Linda caught her own gaze in the rearview mirror and was taken aback. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman who wanted revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten in a moment. "Boss," Linda hissed, clutching the phone so tightly that it almost cracked. The taxi driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He could sense with his spinal cord that something was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before jealousy finally drowned her in its cauldron was to write down the number the text message had been sent from. Linda burst into the agency's office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear. She yanked Ray's office door open to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. "Ray," at lunch, said a fellow journalism student timidly, emerging from the right. He was the first one to catch Linda's furious gaze. "We'll wait for him here." Linda glanced angrily at the assistant's empty chair next to the office and plumped down in her chair, tapping her fingers on the desktop. The whole office stared at her with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Someone had apparently called Ray on the sly, and he came rushing in a few minutes later. "How's it good, sweetheart?" Linda got up from her chair and angrily shoved the phone screen with the message into his nose. At the same time, she glared angrily at Kira, who was frozen in the doorway behind the boss with a stack of documents. "Linda, what's the gig?" Ray tried to pull his wife into the office. "Come on, let's talk calmly." Linda pulled out of her husband's arms and expressively raised her hand with the phone, showing it to the whole office. "Know why? I want everyone to know what a wonderful person you are." She emphasized the word wonderful, a decent boss and a faithful husband. Ray clutched his head, feeling Spanish shame for his wife. "And you should be," Linda pointed her finger at a stunned Kira, "ashamed of yourself for messing around with a married man." "Linda, stop it." Ray grabbed his wife in an arm and dragged her forcefully into his office. Let me go, you traitor." Linda lashed out, hitting her hand on the door. Annoyed Ray sat his wife in his chair and loomed over her. "What did you do? And even if it's such an emergency, why the show? What are you trying to accomplish?" Linda looked at him with eyes red with rage and tears. She shoved the work phone and the message on it in her husband's face again. "How do you explain this? Sleeping with your young assistant, huh? That's it. The old wife is no longer honored." "Linda, have you lost your mind?" Ray rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. Somebody obviously got the wrong number in the heat of the moment. "I even know." Linda crossed her arms over her chest, That red head with the hair you come home with. Jesus, don't you have anything better to do than look for other people's hair on my shirts? Ray rolled his eyes. Find something more productive to do. And Kira has a fiancé, just so you know. And you call your Kira's number, and we'll find out if she's wrong or not. Linda demanded with clenched fists. Everything inside her was boiling with rage and responded with a new wave to every phrase of her husband. Her back was soaked, her cheeks and forehead were burning. Ray picked up his work smartphone and pressed the speakerphone during a call. The answering machine's electronic voice came through the receiver. It rang several times, but to no avail. That doesn't prove anything, Linda said. Linda, go home. Please stop embarrassing me in front of my subordinates, Ray asked in a very firm, quiet voice, turning away to the window. The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that it was as if everyone was laughing at her in her voice without being embarrassed about it. Why did it say the word supervisor? She threw back at Ray, grabbing the doorknob. I have no idea. As if there weren't enough bosses in town, Ray replied without turning round. Linda stepped out of her husband's office, and a dozen curious eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the corridor, not looking at anyone, and on the way out of the building she saw Kira standing by the car park. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Linda froze for a moment, and then shame came over her in a wave that burned her from the inside out. Tears held back for so long tore down the barrier and dripped from her eyes. It's okay. Linda. Catherine counted drops of valerian. Men, they are so dodgy, cunning, but do not cry because of it. Appreciate your dignity. She handed Linda a glass of water and a sedative. Catherine arrived as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice mixed with crying. Catherine, I've embarrassed him. She took the glass with a shaky hand, and him and me. I'm anticipating a story on their website editor's sleep-deprived ex-wife breaks into office. Oh my God, that's embarrassing. Linda was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. Well, Catherine said, at least you're remembered. Why do you have to go there anyway? I'm such an idiot. Linda leaned into her friend's shoulder. We're all a little bit stupid. Catherine gently put her palm on her head. Why did you call me this afternoon? Linda realized that she couldn't handle another confrontation today. I just wanted to chat, she said, maybe go shopping. Well, we're not going out now. No foundation can hide your puffy eyes. I'm telling you as an expert. Catherine raised her finger to the ceiling, which made Linda smile a little. What are you going to do about Ray? I don't believe in random messages. I don't know, maybe I'm just really paranoid. Linda leaned back against the sofa and stared at the ceiling. If so, I should apologize. I'd still dig. Catherine did not stop. It would be reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else, that's for sure. I'll talk to him, Linda breathed out, if I could. For some reason, she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's phone again. And once again it was answered by the monotonous muttering of an electronic robot. Ray came home late that evening, but Linda still waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and, without a word, left for the shower. Ray, I'm sorry. Linda waited for him in the room. The man walked past her, shaking his head. I'll forgive you, Linda, but my reputation is ruined by your tantrum today. There'll be whispers behind my back, and I gave Kira the day off. I was wrong, Ray. Linda stared sorrowfully at the floor. I'm so ashamed. I was so ashamed. Ray sat down on the other side of the couch. You've turned into some kind of paranoid neurotic, haven't you? Going through my things, sniffing my hair, doing this and that, because of some stupid mistake by some stranger, whoever the hell she is. It just seemed to me that our relationship had grown cold, Linda murmured quietly. When it seems, darling, it's customary to cross yourself, Ray muttered. You're playing the jealous wife, aren't you? The idea had failed. But Catherine said, Linda began. Oh, you and Catherine should be in the yellow ward together with ideas like that. Her husband came at her again. She doesn't know what she's listening to. She can't see what's under her nose, but she's giving you the best advice. She herself has a husband who walks left and right. All of a sudden, Ray stopped halfway through the sentence. It looked as if he'd said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to figure out how to put it back. Linda's ears perked up. Anyway, the man squeezed the bridge of his nose with his fingers and closed his eyes. Take a sedative and don't talk to Catherine about any of this nonsense. She's a bad influence. Ray got up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Linda was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubt. Ray knows something about Harry but keeps quiet, male solidarity or something. And why is he suddenly so against Catherine? The tormented Linda paid no attention to her husband's real coldness and his blatant unwillingness to address the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. The head doctor of the clinic informed Linda that she and 2 other young dentists were going to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little happy about this turn of events. It might help her take her mind off her worries, although outwardly no one would have found any reason to do so in Linda's life. Her husband was friendly to her. Catherine still called and chattered like a magpie about everything. The patients hadn't decreased. But behind the outer mask of normality was the affable coldness of her husband, a girlfriend drowned in rhinestones, and a job that suddenly became exhausting and drained all her energy. Linda could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her spouse. She had no proof on her hands except her own words. No, enough with the suspicions. I'd better get my own family in order first. Ray agreed that the trip would be good for his wife and even bought her a train ticket. Go listen to some smart guys and aunts, go for a walk, and get all the nonsense out of your head, he told Linda as she packed her traveling bag. The train was tapping its wheels. The girl rarely traveled by train, and each time it was a bit of a novelty. Colleagues were arguing animatedly nearby to the clinking of the glass of the cup holders. Maybe Ray's right, I am paranoid. He and I have been together since we were 18, and there's never been any occasion, Linda thought, looking out the window at the passing railway stations and Christmas trees. And the amount of stares at him at uni, I didn't care then, well, hardly. Yes, it's all Catherine's way of panicking herself and others. Whether it was the monotonous choo-choo-choo that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the journey, Linda was in a pleasant mood. She put her head down on the iron and freshly laundered linen. I'll be back and we'll definitely go to Grandma's in Iowa, Linda decided and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sea and the sun really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials for work, and in the afternoon they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase her worries from her mind. Linda thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Ray about the trip, how the 2 of them would go to the place where the malachite was mined. It's a shame Catherine isn't with me, the girl thought as she watched the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Linda really wanted to share her peacefulness with her loved ones. After all, her colleagues were only colleagues. On the 3rd day, the organizers said that the last speaker couldn't come due to illness, apologized to the participants and informed them that the training was closed. Linda decided not to stay one more day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket on the same day and went home. Here's a surprise for Ray, I'll be home early. And with a tan too, she smiled as she looked out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the journey, Linda had a nice chat with her neighbor and her grandson of 9 years. Granny treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about work, recalling her own youth. The morning city was just waking up, washed by the night rain. It was not as warm as the sea, and even a little fresh. Outside the window of the taxi passed sleepy alleys and early joggers. In the alleys, the first rays of sunshine dispersed the foggy remnants, played in the puddles and glimmered drops on bushes and tree branches. The taxi driver helped her unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off to his new passengers. Linda thought about how she would go up to the flat, go in quietly and get into bed with Ray asleep. How nice that today was her husband's day off and they would be able to sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about the upcoming trip. Linda quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Ray. Quietly, she walked into the flat and as soon as she saw the familiar corridor, she was dumbfounded. All the good cheer she'd brought with her from the sea had gone down and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart pounded like the wheels of the train that had brought her back here. There were shoes lying in the corridor that she would have recognized out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and had picked up the last pair in town. The shoes were Catherine's. By the mirror, however, Linda saw her keys and the same painfully familiar car fob. For a moment, a childish, naive thought crept into her head. Maybe something's happened and Catherine's come to ask for help. But the thought was immediately suffocated by the falling curtain of obviousness. From the bedroom, Linda heard soft voices. It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so that the neighbors could hear her. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. I almost talked him into buying me the salon outright from Miranda. A familiar female voice sounded. Will you get a divorce as soon as the deal is official? The husband's voice answered him. The same day. When are you going to file the papers? I'm thinking of what to tell her, followed a sigh. The idea of a fake affair has failed. It failed because someone left their work phone at home, the woman's voice interrupted. I've been working her as hard as I can. A little bit more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. We would have come out dry. And now you either have to talk to her head on, or think of something else. In the forehead is a pity. I don't like her as a woman, but as a human being, I pity her. And it is not a pity to make a show, smirked a female voice. I choose the lesser of two evils, said the male voice. Linda clamped her hands over her mouth and felt the corners of her eyes grow wet. A wave of cold swept down her back, her cheeks felt hot, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed by invisible hands. Her realization fell in pieces, and each was nastier than the last. It burned, drained away all the good inside, like acid. Ray, you and I tried it back in college, but you were too right then, and I was too stupid. But if it had worked, then, Catherine's voice sounded quietly, but ingratiatingly, might not have been these long years with a bore from the dentist. My husband might not have been there, and now everything would be easier, and we'd be living somewhere abroad by now. If everything works out, it will Ray confirmed. We'll run the salon remotely. You run the salon and I'll run the agency. Linda felt the tears wet her t-shirt and imprinted hot drops on her chest. We'll be gone, and they might have something with Harry. I've seen the way he looks at her, he chuckled from behind the door. I've seen the way he looks at her. She's the perfect girl for Linda. She loves dumplings, borscht, and watching soap operas at night. She's always been a little short for you. She loves her job and doesn't like herself very much, said Ray. We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the homegirl who always has everything planned. I feel like an old man around her. I want something different. I know what you want, Ray. What do you want, Ray? Catherine cooed. From across the room there was a commotion. Linda sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and betrayal of the two people she thought were closest to her, after her mother. The last bit of realization poured out. The cup was empty. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the flat in what she was wearing. The street, the morning, Linda ran away from the shame and disgrace she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence. She wanted to forget, to erase her memory. She wanted to go back 10 years, to pull her hand out of Catherine's fingers, to send the smug, insolent man to the dormitory. Every year that passed was like a rod whipping her in the back, leaving deep wounds and triple the pain that came on more and more. Tears welled up in her eyes. Everything was cloudy and barely recognizable. She stopped, breathed, and ran again. She was shouted at by passers-by, but Linda didn't hear, didn't see. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling, from herself. Girl, look out, was the last shred of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness overrode her. The measured sounds of the PI snapped Linda out of oblivion. She also thought irritably, what was that nasty beeping sound like the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the past? Her eyes struggled to open, her body felt woozy, her right leg felt petrified and wouldn't move. My entire right side responded with painful tightening when I tried to turn around on the bed, and my head was buzzing. "Good morning. You're finally awake, Linda," greeted her by a woman in a white dressing gown. Linda looked around and only then realized she was in a hospital bed. What happened to me? She looked at the leg in a cast sticking out from under the blanket. You were hit by a car. I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, mild concussion, and moderate bruises, the doctor replied. Looking through the documents, they pick up other people in pieces in such cases. You were born with your shirt on. Your family will be happy to know that you'll be well soon. Not all the family. Linda turned her back to the wall. Is there someone coming to call your relatives? The doctor asked. Tell my husband I was hit by a car and I'm dead. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her, Everlinda said, without turning round. The doctor shook her head. If they come, don't let them in my room, Linda added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the red cross seemed to shield her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't seem to bother them much in the face of how much their souls were torn. Her mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She first cringed, then cursed, then cried at her daughter's bedside. Linda told her everything she had heard that morning. When Melissa left her daughter's room, she gave the nurses each a box of chocolates, and on pain of complaining to the head doctor, ordered her not to let anyone with names beginning with the letters R and K see her daughter. Linda blocked the numbers of her husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a colleague friend to collect her belongings from her husband's flat when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks and the fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the door of the room. Linda thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. Come in, the girl shouted, not looking away from the magazine her mom had brought. Hello, Linda, came a familiar voice. Harry stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers and a dressing gown thrown over his shoulders. Linda had mixed feelings when she saw her ex-girlfriend's husband. On the one hand, he reminded her of what had happened, but on the other hand, he had nothing to do with it. You don't know how hard it took me to get here, the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. It's almost like they're checking IDs to get to you. That's my request, Linda nodded. Why? Are you hiding from someone? Harry joked. Maybe I am, the girl confirmed. Harry stared at her in surprise, his eyes wide with question and incomprehension. Linda exhaled and decided to tell him. She recalled everything, including Catherine's outings at the Institute, her consumerist attitude to men, and her hypocrisy under the mask of her friend. Harry listened with his mouth open. I want you not to fall victim to their game like I did. Get a divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. Don't you dare buy the salon. Catherine is using you and has used you. Linda's done. Where did you? A stunned Harry couldn't believe his ears. They talked about it for a long time. The girl asked the man not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. Towards the end, when Harry was about to leave, he asked, Linda, tell me, do I have a chance? Not now, she shook her head. I want to be alone. Maybe, in the future, maybe. I get it. Get well soon. I'll be stopping by if you don't mind. Harry nodded. Come over. She blinked, showing agreement. Time goes differently in a small town than it does in a big city. It's measured and quiet. The hustle and bustle is alien to those who are used to getting up to the crowing of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone brightly against the snow. The snow itself sparkled in the sunlight, still fresh and unmarred by anyone's feet and paws. Granddaughter, there's a letter for you, Grandmother Emma shouted, coming into the hay and waving the envelopes. Thank you, Linda shouted from the kitchen. She was preparing a simple breakfast for herself and Grandma. It's been a long time since I've seen a letter, Grandma Emma said, sitting down on her stool. You young people are all calling now. A letter from some fiancé. She handed Linda an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After her recovery, Linda went straight to her grandmother's house in the country. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the betrayal and shame she had experienced. She quit her job, settled other minor issues, and made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings so that she would not have to face Ray again. Out of sight, out of mind, her mother said as she saw her off. Go as far as you like and come back as often as you like. Only call me often. It was quiet in the village, where the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work healing the wounded soul. Her mother didn't talk about Ray and the divorce, only promised to tell me when it was all over. The envelope had an address and Harry's name on it. How he knew where to find her remained a mystery. Linda ran her eyes over the lines Harry had written about the divorce, about leaving Catherine with almost nothing. She consciously skipped that part of the letter. Dear Linda, I realize I'm probably an extra person in your life, but since that evening in the cafe, you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go. The girl paused, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after those words. I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for a reply, Harry. Linda folded the letter, tucked it away in an envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she was still in doubt at the hospital, she knew for sure now. Grandma Emma came into the room. Do you think what to write back? Questioned the old woman, looking at the concentrated face of her granddaughter. I think that old admirers are not invited to a new life. Linda smiled at her grandmother as she tore open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the bin and looked out the window. Grandma, the neighbor's here probably to ask about Daisy again. They're so restless. They'll heal the animal. The old woman shook her hands and shuffled into the hay.
Why is it so expensive? At home, my son will make such a thing in a couple of minutes and color it even faster. Why such cosmic prices? Emily only pressed her lips together in embarrassment at such words. She was asking for a very small amount of money. But the people of their provincial town, accustomed to saving money on everything, did not want to give such money for the labor of her disabled father, and even covered her with criticism every time. What are these unique works that you are asking so much? Emily tried to sell figurines at the train station, hoping that some of the capital's tourists would appreciate the work. However, she was quickly driven out of there with an offer. Either pay a percentage or get out. Emily would not have refused to pay for the place, but the amount of rent offered by the local collectors was absolutely exorbitant, $10,000 per day. Surprised, Emily questioned the smirking big guy in a tracksuit who was smoking unashamedly next to her. Where am I going to get that kind of money? In a month, if I'm lucky, I won't make all that money. The big guy, enjoying his cigarette, grinned and exhaled the smoke directly into the girl's face. Then Riley remarked, "Do as you please, baby. This is serious business, after all. If you want, you can always pay individually." With this look, he seemed to be inspecting the girl from top to bottom, which instantly made her want to take a shower. "Don't," she replied grimly, lowering her gaze. "I'd better pack my things and go home." With a disappointed shake of his head, the big man stepped aside. You could have made a deal. He held out his hand to Rosa, the odor of which gave away his addiction to tobacco. Staggering sharply to the side, the girl gave a definite warning. "I'm going to scream or call the police. Just try to touch me." The jock lowered his hand and swung it in the air, freezing near Emily's face for a moment, then grinned and said playfully, "And you're smart and pretty, not bad at all. Too bad you're not with us. You could have dressed well and not walk like a bum in the last rags." "I'm not going to deal with bandits," she said in a serious tone as she began to put her things in her gym bag. When Emily was about to leave the platform, the big man suddenly blocked her way with his body. He looked down at her like an insect, smiling nastily. "Let me through," she said through gritted teeth, not looking at him. He bent toward her and spoke quietly but threateningly. "You, Emily, Better think exhaling another stream of smoke and calling her by name. It would be better for you to be with me, in your best interest. You'll be out of school soon. And then what? Every door in this town will be closed to you. You won't get a job as a janitor, but your mom's already taken care of that. So you won't be able to follow in her footsteps. I already have people to take care of me. I already said I won't come here again. Let me through or I'll really call the police. The bumpkin asked with a sneer. Are you talking about your father? He won't help you. He looked around and added briefly, I've said it all. If you try to complain about me, it will be worse. I'll give you a sweet life in this town. You bet Emily, who turned 17 earlier this year, did look a little older than her age, trim thanks to her daily jogging and her technician mother's help cleaning the stores. And at the same time slender as a modest rose, she was unwittingly admired by almost all the boys at school. However, because of her family's low social status, no one, except for criminals like this big guy he himself looked no more than 20, considered the girl as a love interest. Emily herself never looked for romantic adventures and devoted all her free time exclusively to helping her parents. But even if this scoundrel was suddenly the last man on earth, she would never agree to be his date. The girls saw how near the only nightclub in their small town, gangsters like him left in the arms of young girls dressed in short skirts. Emily didn't need to guess who they were. She was old enough to realize how complicated real life was. But even in her worst nightmare, the girl couldn't imagine such a shameful future awaiting her. Standing in front of an unpleasant threat, Emily began to feel the fear inevitably overwhelming her. After all, she was all alone at the train station, with no one to protect her. Luckily, at that moment, the burly man's cell phone rang. Emily, taking advantage of his moment of distraction, quickly slipped out of his sight. She returned home that day depressed and without money. The calendar showed the last Sunday in May. That meant that Emily had the longest and hardest week before prom, when all her classmates would talk about what dress they would wear, what hairstyle and manicure they would choose for the big event. And guys will try to invite the most attractive girls of the school to the prom. And of course, no one will be invited to spend time at the last school ball in her life, nor will she have any dress, shoes, or manicure. Honey, are you okay, Olivia? The girl's mother inquired cautiously. You're all pale today. Didn't get any sales at all. Emily covered her eyes with her hands, unable to hold back the tears that were about to spill. My girl, what's wrong? Did someone hurt you? Cradling her crying daughter, the woman asked again. I don't want to, and I don't want to go to that stupid prom, Emily finally managed to utter, trying to control her sobs. Olivia stroked her daughter's soft, dark brown, glossy hair and looked into her lovely golden brown eyes. Honey, but prom is one of the most important days in any girl's life, isn't it? Are you sure you want to miss such an important event? There won't be a second time like this in your life, her mother warned her. Emily only sighed a couple times, then sat down on the bed and began to wipe her eyes thoroughly with a handkerchief. And it's a good thing it won't. I don't want to see any female beauty at this party. The guests would all be bragging about their expensive dresses to each other and drinking cheap red wine, while the class teacher and the principal discussed the biggest gossip of the year in the corner of the gym. Olivia smiled at her daughter, but Emily saw a slight sadness in that smile. Are you really that worried about not having anything to wear? She asked affectionately. I've already put some money aside for a dress for you. And the shoes? You can have my shoes. Do you remember the white ones? I married your father in them? Her mother's eyes filled with a mist through which unpleasant memories peered. Sometimes Emily marveled at how much her parents loved each other, even though they'd lived together for years and had endured hardships. Olivia had come to this town from the remote countryside, where she had been raised by her grandmother until she came of age. Unfortunately, Olivia was never able to enroll in any educational institution to continue her studies. The knowledge she received in the village was barely enough not to starve to death. The young girl was offered only low-skilled work as a cleaner, or, what was even worse, openly obscene offers. To somehow get a grip in this place and make ends meet, Emily's mother got a job as a floor cleaner in the office of a taxi company located near the station. It was there that she met Jack, her future husband. Jack had been working as a cab driver for several years and was earning quite well. He was immediately attracted to a modest, pretty cleaner who came to their town from the provinces. Her purity and openness touched the man's heart, so soon the cab driver invited the girl to their first date, after which he and Olivia began to officially meet. About a year later, the couple planned a wedding, after which the young people happily lived in marriage for almost 10 years. During this time they had Emily, an adorable daughter. All this time, the woman continued to work in a taxicab company, and her husband drove shuttling residents to and from the suburbs. The salary Olivia received was not much, but thanks to Jack their little family kept afloat, being able, though not lavish, but to buy everything necessary for life. That year, however, when little Emily turned 11, trouble came knocking on their door. Jack was driving an elderly couple from the village back to the city. The weather that fall was very wet, and it was raining all the time. Because of this, the driver had to be doubly attentive on the wet road, making sure that he could fit into the next corner or slow down at the traffic lights. The elderly people Jack was driving were, as it turned out, very talkative and overly emotional. They were always dissatisfied and threatened to file a complaint against the cab driver. Because of this, Emily's father was distracted from the road, trying to subdue the unrestrained couple. In one of these tense moments, the man did not notice the warning sign and, losing control of the control, rammed the iron fence, flying with passengers into the ditch. The car flipped several times on the steep slope before it stopped its sad journey. Fortunately, the elderly passengers were hardly injured, receiving only a few scratches, while Jack's life was endangered. His right arm was so badly damaged that he could have died from loss of blood. Doctors, as if by a miracle, managed to save him, but had to amputate the badly injured arm. When the cab driver came to his senses, he could not believe what had happened. How could it be, he asked himself. I was the pillar of the family. What's going to happen to Olivia and Emily now? Olivia reassured him with great difficulty and assured him that life didn't stop there and they would always be together, regardless of the incidents. She promised to do whatever she could to help the family through the difficult times. From then on, Olivia had to work a lot more. She picked up extra shifts at the town's only hospital and worked at the school where their daughter attended. Jack, though he went through a period of deep despondency, soon gathered his will together. Despite the loss of his arm, he still saw himself as the head of the family and could not allow himself to be completely supported by his wife and daughter. Emily, who was no longer a little girl, actively helped her mother. To find a new source of income, Jack began to develop his left arm and looked for alternative ways to earn money. Driving a cab was now not an option. After 6 months of hard work, he mastered the art of making papier-mâché figurines and weaving ball baskets. For materials, he had to travel to the nearest forest and gather suitable branches for his craft. Jack, who was strong in spirit, was ready to sell the fruits of his art himself. But to this occupation, all the local men who knew Emily's father by sight treated, if not with contempt, then with a slight irony. Here was a normal man, drove people. Now he's gone so far as to sell baskets on the street, they said. That's when Emily suggested that her father sit in his place on a busy shopping street in town, she said. Do you wash the hallways before class? Father refused at first. That's not good for you. I can see how your classmates look at you, can't you? Emily was embarrassed but tried to brush it off, though her father was sadly right. Well, let them, she replied, smiling. It's not like I'm doing this for their amusement. It's because we need the money. You spend so much time on weaving and figurines as it is, and women are more willing to buy such things from women. What about your studies? Father asked doubtfully. What studies? Studying isn't going anywhere, replied Emily simply. I'll trade on the weekends, and I'll start with the grounds. Then I'll go to the market or the train station. There's a lot of people there, maybe we'll make something. Jack furtively wiped a large tear from the corner of his eye. He thanked God every day for his magnificent family, who supported and understood each other in everything. He couldn't have wished for more, except for the hardships of being without an arm. Okay, he agreed, but only after work, straight home. You shouldn't fall behind in your studies because of this." "Don't worry," the daughter laughed back. "I learn the material quickly, like the teachers say. I'll be fine." Emboldened, Emily shook her father's hand firmly and thought about how much she loved her family. For the sake of her loved ones, she was ready to overcome any difficulties, as long as they were healthy, knew no need, and greeted each new day with joy. Her father, Jack, was rightly worried about how her classmates treated his daughter. Despite Emily's friendliness, the school community was reluctant to accept her into their circle. Rose stood out in class, even becoming one of the most attractive girls and regularly receiving excellent grades in PE, but the other female students only sought to tease her. "What, Emily, getting ready for your after-school program, Amelia?" The class's recognized beauty taunted her. "Let me guess you have an extra class today. On carrying a bucket of water or not? Wait, probably obstacle course practice stairs over a mop, right?" Amelia laughed an obnoxious, hysterical laugh. Emily had to gather her strength not to respond to Amelia with something harsh and insulting. She tried to avoid school conflicts, but her patience was not limitless. "Amelia, maybe you should work on your super weight loss drug," Emily spoke calmly, tying the laces on her old sneakers. Vicky's laughter suddenly broke off. "Really? He's already making your brain melt. You're laughing like a lunatic," Emily continued. A grimace of anger and disgust appeared on Amelia's face. Emily had guessed her rival's vulnerability, for Amelia was trying desperately to lose weight to fit into a designer prom dress. But the size range of such dresses, unfortunately for Amelia, the slip ended in a size 42. "You lowlife," Amelia hissed, barely audible. "You'd be better off scrubbing floors. You'll never be able to marry with such a horrible pedigree anyway. It's not worth even trying. All your training and 5-kilometer runs will be for nothing." "I don't care if it's 10, Amelia spat out, unable to contain her anger. "The most you can be in this town is a summoned girl. And that's if someone doesn't feel uncomfortable sleeping with a girl who's been shoveling dirt like a pig since high school." With those words, Amelia threw a dirty rag left by the cleaning lady in the locker room at Emily with a swing. The rag hit Emily's head with a dirty sound, and all the girls in the locker room laughed with one voice. That's what she should do. Show her, Amelia, where she belongs. Who is she to voice her opinion here? Amelia's friends chimed in, trying to approve of the actions of the class's leading beauty. Emily was shaking with inner indignation and anger. She had never felt such dislike for herself from her classmates. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve like a drop of water in a hot pan. Suddenly, unable to hold back any longer, Emily screamed. "Why don't you all suffocate yourselves with your hatred? You are only interested in gossiping about boys and retelling rumors. You have no other interests but money and clothes. I despise you, you're soulless." Without realizing how she got out of the locker room, Emily ran through the hallways, flying past the astonished students right into the street. "Emily! Emily! Class isn't over yet. What's your hurry?" the gym teacher shouted after her. But the girl didn't listen to him. She ran 5 laps in a row before her heart started beating steady again. Emily didn't know where she got such resistance to running, but she was sure that everything in life is given for a reason. If she had the opportunity to develop this skill, then she should take advantage of it. Running was the only way to help her calm down and get her thoughts in order. Trying to regain her breath, Emily approached her classroom. The boys, lined up and unaware of what had happened in the girls' locker room, were watching their classmate in surprise, some even with envy. Watch and learn. The gym teacher waved his hand in Emily's direction. 3 kilometers in 10 minutes, and in those shoes. The Olympians should have included her in their ranks, not like you knuckleheads. On the start left, go, 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 go. He commanded, and after a loud whistle, Emily's classmates ran with dejected faces to perform the standard. "Well done," Emily clapped Emily on the shoulder with the teacher. "Get some rest. This is the first time I've seen results like this in the last 5 years. You have real talent." The gym teacher shook his head and left to follow the high schoolers' run. Emily sat on the lower gym bench, pondering his words. It was too late to start an athletic career, but was there any other way to utilize her running abilities? She never found an answer to that question, especially after the incident in the locker room and the constant taunts from the other girls. Emily wasn't going to go to the prom, but her mom Olivia still persuaded her daughter not to miss such an event. After all, it's better to get your diploma so you don't have to come back here again, the understanding mother winked. And don't show them you're scared. If you don't show up for graduation, that's exactly what they'll think. Okay, Emily sighed heavily and agreed. Okay, let this be my last fight. Olivia helped her daughter pick out a dress. They eventually found an inexpensive but elegant sapphire-colored slip dress at a second-hand store that perfectly accentuated Emily's athletic figure. The beautiful noble shade of the dress perfectly matched Emily's natural hair color. The wedding shoes, which her mother lent her, harmonized with the outfit and the high hairstyle, which the girl made herself. It's just a pity I don't have any jewelry at all, Olivia complained, looking sadly at her daughter's festive look. What do you mean? No jewelry, Jack suddenly entered the conversation, smiling at his favorite women. Dad, what are you? Emily looked uncertainly at her father, her eyes expressing worry and excitement. Don't tell me you bought something, she said, resigned at the thought of the extra expense. I did. Her father nodded with a smile and pulled a small velvet box from his shirt pocket. Rose felt ashamed. Her mother had already spent the money for the magic dress on her, and now her father had prepared something too. Well, why? She asked guiltily. Jack held out the box, insisting open it. Emily, with bated breath, opened the box. On a velvet cushion lay a tiny gold pendant in the shape of a star, no bigger than a fingernail on her finger. The 5-pointed star sparkled with rays, with a small bright crystal flashing at each end. In the light, the pebbles created a halo of multicolored lights. My God, it's beautiful, mother and daughter sighed almost simultaneously. Jack smiled and said, Rose, you are a guiding star to me that keeps me on course, just as Mama is my 2 bright stars. With these words, he hugged first his wife, then his daughter, who immediately clung to her father's strong shoulder. Thank you, Daddy, Emily spoke through tears of gratitude. I'll never take it off. I'll always wear it on me like a talisman, Emily pondered, feeling the warm message the pendant carried from her father. Jack had arranged with his daughter to pick her up from school in the evening when the festivities were over. Darkness was coming fast in their neighborhood in the evening, and teenagers caught up in the holiday spirit could be especially unpredictable. That was why her father had decided to make sure his daughter was safe, in case drunken classmates wanted to cross the boundaries. When Emily entered the assembly hall where the event was held, many of her classmates were quiet for a moment, recognizing the girl. She looked around, deciding where best to settle down to minimize unnecessary stares in her direction. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to Amelia, who could rightfully be called the queen of the school. A queen is never alone, Emily thought as she watched Amelia, surrounded by an entourage of 3 girls and 2 guys, make her way towards her. Emily noticed that Amelia never wore the coveted dress from the famous designer's brand. She didn't seem to be able to adjust to the demands of the famous fashion line. Instead, she had chosen a tight, extremely short leather dress, the color of which fluctuated between a flesh tone and a bronze powder color. Emily just thought, at least the dress doesn't completely blend in with her body, otherwise you'd think she'd come here without clothes. Well, here comes our Cinderella, Amelia said, stretching her vowels in a long, florid voice. Cute dress. Did you get it secondhand? It's okay. You can wear it once, and then it'll come in handy for household chores. Emily gritted her teeth to keep from responding to the provocation. It was at that moment that Amelia noticed the gold pendant around her neck. How lovely, the classmate exclaimed and reached out her hand, trying to touch the jewelry. Don't touch it, Emily sharply pushed her hand away. It was a gift from her father that was priceless to Emily, and the corners of her lips turned into a crooked smile. It should hurt, Amelia said with a dismissive arch of an eyebrow. It's just a cheap thing bought on sale anyway. If I asked for one, my parents would give me a dozen of them. Amelia turned around and led the rest of the boys, who reluctantly followed their leader. Emily chuckled softly. It seemed that even her most loyal fans were beginning to tire of Amelia's arrogance. After the graduation ceremony, the disco began. Everyone was dancing to the upbeat music and hot drinks. Emily was in no mood to dance or to continue the party. Having accepted her documents, she wanted to leave immediately. But the principal asked her to stay, assuring her that this was the last time they would all be together, and Emily stayed. As the slow dance began, Emily noticed a figure approaching her. Emerging from the haze of disco smoke, it was Joseph, Amelia's boyfriend. "Hi, Emily," Joseph began, smiling softly. "You really look great tonight. Can I ask you to dance?" Emily felt embarrassed. Why all this attention from Amelia's boyfriend? And where was Amelia now? "Won't your lover get mad?" the girl tried to joke back. A shadow of displeasure flashed across the guy's face. "No, she won't be upset. She's already fed up with her. Wouldn't you know it?" He rolled his eyes upward. "Every day it's the same thing, Joseph. Am I pretty, Joseph? Am I losing weight for sure, Joseph? The scale seems to be showing something wrong," and so on. It's impossible with her. Emily could barely contain her laughter. Apparently, he was conveying her character with a great deal of irony. "Yeah, she's really self-loving," Emily nodded. "Okay, but just one dance. I should be going home soon." "Whatever you say, lovely lady." Joseph smiled and, performing an elegant gesture, offered Emily his arm. Emily danced a slow dance for the first time in her life. It was an amazing and inexpressible sensation. It felt as if a swarm of little colored hummingbirds had been released inside her, bringing her whole body to life, making every movement weightless. Joseph never took his eyes off Emily, as if he genuinely wanted to understand who she was, what she liked, and what was in her heart. In her musings, Emily didn't immediately notice the movement behind her. But before she could do anything, Joseph grabbed her firmly by the shoulders and turned her toward his girlfriend. "Here's your swoop," Amelia said, and unceremoniously doused Emily with tomato juice, straight from the bag. Emily froze for a moment, startled by the unexpected aggression. "Drink, drink. Slop on your brat," Amelia snarled, pouring the drink generously over her. "You miserable fool. Did you really believe Joseph wanted to dance with you? Thought he was interested in you?" Amelia laughed throughout the room. Stop it, Amelia. You're completely insane," Emily shrieked, struggling to free herself from Joseph's grip. Once free, Emily began to shake off the sticky liquid. Her dress, her hair, and even her mom's wedding shoes were hopelessly ruined. "God, how can you be such a monster, Amelia? Why do you hate me so much?" Emily said desperately. Amelia grinned again with an almost majestic smile, grinning through all 32 teeth, and prepared to give her venomous reply. "That's the joy of hating you. I just despise you, Emily. Because people like you are always trying to stick out of your filthy hole like mice waiting for someone to deliver cheese for them from the outside. You gotta know your place and keep your head down. What do you think? I didn't see you flashing your legs at our boys in gym class," Amelia said. "Amelia, wake up. I'm just a great runner. And it's nobody's fault that you can't stop eating French fries in packs." Apparently that last remark had finally pissed Amelia off. She swung at her classmate, brought her perfectly painted hand down sharply, and grabbed the chain around Emily's neck, ripping off the pendant Jack had given her. "Thought you could be better than me," Amelia whispered, clutching Emily's gold star in her fist. "But I have money and position in society, and all you have is your mops and a filthy rag that you'll use every day for the rest of your life to lick the floors of this school, or some rundown hospital on the outskirts." Emily tore toward the offending girl, but Joseph grabbed her arms, preventing Amelia from resisting. "Give it back. Give it back now," the girl tearfully shouted. "You have no right to even touch him. You are the most disgusting person I have ever known. Give me back the pendant." Remember, Amelia held the pendant up to Emily's face, knowing full well that she couldn't take it away from her. "You are the pathetic daughter of a cleaning lady, and you can never even come close to being a normal person." In a thick, low voice, Amelia said, "Repeat after me. I know my place, Amelia. I'm the pathetic daughter of a maintenance worker. Screw you, Emily said with a hateful glare at the leather-clad blonde. Resentment slammed into her head, preventing her from lashing out with an all-consuming sense of anger. Say it again, or you'll never see your public show again, Amelia uttered, and wanted to throw the pendant to the floor to crush it with the heel of her lacquered shoe. But at that moment the general lights flashed brightly, and the teens saw Headmistress Isabella looking at them with all the sternness only she was capable of. What is this going on here? Amelia, she angrily asked the wealthy alumna. After which she glared menacingly at Joseph, who instantly released Emily. The girl didn't hold back her feelings any longer and slapped the suitor with an impressive slap. "You filthy henchman," Emily said through gritted teeth. Then she held out her open palm to Amelia. "Give it back. What you took now." Amelia, who was being looked at reproachfully by the principal, put the pendant back into Emily's palm, being careful not to touch her, after defiantly wiping her hands on her dress. "Isabella, can I go home shivering with humiliation and resentment?" Emily asked her. "My dad's probably waiting for me outside by now." She realized at that moment that she had become an absolute laughingstock in front of all the students and teachers at her school. Isabella looked at the girl with genuine regret and said briefly, "Of course, my dear. The idea of a happy life for you after school is belated," she added. But Emily was already closing the doors to the assembly hall behind her, at the same time to that monstrous part of her now definitive past. After graduation, Emily had been in a terrible state, for almost a month, not wanting to go out, not wanting to discuss what had happened with her parents. When Jack met her outside the school and saw the mental and physical state his daughter was in, the man was ready to tear up. "Daughter, just tell me who the creeps are that did this to you. They're your classmates, right?" "Who cares?" Emily waved it away. "Forget it, Dad. It was just some fools playing a joke on me like that. Fortunately, I don't have to socialize with any of them anymore. I can't see this school at all. Let's go home." The distraught father calmed his daughter down as best he could, but he returned home feeling quite upset. His sacred duty was to protect his own blood, and now this. And Emily, a light-hearted person, flatly refused to reveal the names of the scoundrels. Jack could not, with all his will, burst into the school and shake the information out of the teachers. Olivia reassured her husband, if her daughter doesn't want to talk about it, she doesn't need to be involved, so she has to deal with it on her own. In addition, she assured her husband, Emily always knows that we are there for her, and we will always help her with whatever she needs. Our daughter is very strong. If she needs our help, you and I will know about it, believe me. Emily, meanwhile, was lying flat on her bed, clutching the broken chain from her pendant in her hand. It wasn't even the dress or the nasty words Amelia had said that hurt the most. It was the ruined gift from her father that made Emily angry. She realized that the chain could be repaired, but she didn't want to burden her parents with it, telling them that she'd just taken the pendant off and put it away. Emily contemplated her future. Now that the hated school was over, the girl could for the first time consciously choose what to do with her life next. She realized that she had no prospects in this city. But to enter a good university in the capital for this also required a lot of money. And where to get it from? Ordinary good people from the backwoods. And Emily could not just take and leave her parents. They needed help, including material. The girl listed in her mind what she could do best. But unfortunately, the list of her skills was not long-running, cooking, and the ability to mop floors flawlessly. Geez, Emily thought, was Amelia right? I'm not going to be any good in this life with these abilities, am I? Bitter tears ran down Emily's cheeks. It turned out that her classmate had unknowingly predicted her future. However, Emily was not one to let circumstances get the best of her. So she decided to take action. She planned to work all next year to save enough money. Then she intended to go to large cities, where she wanted to take courses related to office work, and perhaps after that find a good job with decent pay. Emily was ready for hardship for the sake of changing her life and freeing herself from the humiliations of the past. Having discussed her plans with her parents, she felt relieved. They were not against the girl trying to find a decent job. Jack and his spouse rejoiced at the change in their daughter. "I'll try to keep helping you, but I also need to think about my life," she promised her parents. "I want you to be proud of me." A few days later, Emily submitted her resume to an employment agency. She offered her services as a maid and could also work as a cook if needed. Surprisingly, she received a call very quickly. Within a week, Emily was already sitting across from an employee of the agency who scrutinized her characteristics. After scrutinizing her closely, the woman looked Emily sternly in the eye. "How about your stress tolerance? Do you tolerate unusual situations?" normally asked the agency employee. The girl was a bit taken aback, as this was the first time she had ever been asked such a question, but she still replied, "Depends on what you mean by unconventional." The personnel officer raised a perfectly fine eyebrow and began to curl her fingers. "Well, for example, if you were to suddenly be unreasonably, from your point of view, insulted, raised your voice, or, on the contrary, given special attention, perhaps even with elements of slight flirtation." Emily gasped in amazement. "I'm sorry, are you trying to get me a job as a maid? Or, with all due respect, sell me to a not-so-decent establishment?" she asked. The girl realized that after such words she would probably not have a job. However, she couldn't help it. She would not allow herself to be humiliated again. Never again. The employee nodded her head briefly and marked something in her notebook, then looked up at Emily. "So what will you answer?" More or less politely. "Yes, and your response is quite appropriate. I'll report these points to my superiors so they can make a final decision." "That's a warning," Emily interjected. "Consider it a yes," the HR person nodded at her. "Expect to be contacted within 3 days. If you are contacted, then you are accepted. You'll learn the rest of the details of your job directly on the spot. And yes, I almost forgot. You will be required to live on the employer's premises for the duration of your contract." Emily nodded in agreement. This all seemed very strange, but also exciting. She was very eager to be accepted for the position. It promised a very generous salary, which would come in handy to help her parents. And even if these unusual situations arose, she did not intend to give herself any offense. 2 days later, Emily's cell phone rang merrily, informing the girl that she had been accepted as a maid in the house of a wealthy businessman. "Mom, Dad, yay! I have a job now," Emily announced cheerfully to her parents. They said they'd be here to pick me up in an hour. As she ran to pack her things, she felt the excitement and anticipation of her new life. Olivia exhaled a sigh of relief and crossed herself, while her husband, Jack, gently hugged her with the arm that had survived the accident. Emily's mother slowly lowered her head onto her husband's shoulder. "Here's our little girl heading into adulthood," she said quietly. "God, let's hope she does well there." "Don't worry," Olivia. Jack pulled her close. "Remember, you told me yourself our daughter is a very strong person. She'll get through this." When it was time to leave, Emily was overcome with tears. Her parents saw her off with all the warmth of their hearts, hoping that the girl would soon come to visit them for the weekend to share her impressions of her new job. A huge black business class Jeep pulled up behind Emily. Getting into the car, the girl felt the huge space of the cabin, as if she was inside a cruise liner. The driver, a silent middle-aged man, calmly drove her to her destination. In front of the house she was to work in, Emily was stunned. It was a gigantic 4-story mansion of modern style with glass and chrome metal. Emily thought to herself that the owner must really like shopping malls. She followed the head housekeeper, who was bringing her up to speed on her way to the pool. "Try not to make eye contact with Harry when he asks you something," the housekeeper instructed. "Rather, lower your gaze immediately and answer strictly to the point. If, however, you happen to be cleaning and the master enters the room, don't fuss and generally pretend not to notice his presence. Just get on with your work." Harry was used to all the servants moving and working almost silently. You are part of this house, and in a way you are obliged to blend in with it and everything that goes on here. Often we don't pay attention to some of the little whims of the owner. We only call security if we realize it could endanger his life and health. Emily was silent, but she felt as if she was in some modern fairy tale about an enchanted castle, where everyone is silent and can't say a word to the cruel king who rules this high-tech kingdom. The housekeeper's last sentence, however, surprised Emily somewhat. "Pardon me, I believe you said something about whimsy. May I clarify exactly what is meant?" The housekeeper stopped and looked at the girl with a look that looked like she was trying to shine invisible X-rays through her thoughts. "You weren't warned by the agency about possible irregularities, did you?" she asked dryly. "No, why not?" "It was explained to me that there were some special circumstances involved, but what exactly?" The housekeeper raised her eyebrows elegantly. "Well then, you will soon see for yourself." The woman led her toward a large rectangular pool, on whose marble terrace sat a young man reclining in a tank chair. He was wearing large sunglasses, a bright red Hawaiian shirt, and knee-length white shorts. The guy looked to be about 24 to 25 years old. Judging by his relaxed demeanor and the way he calmly flipped through the newspaper lying in his lap, this was the owner's son. "Please," the housekeeper nodded to him. "Emily, our new maid, arrived exactly 10 minutes ago, as the master requested." With that, the lady silently withdrew, leaving the girl and the young man alone. "How do you do?" Emily greeted him politely. "Excuse me, do you know how long we have to wait for Harry?" The man froze, holding the newspaper half open, and then looked at the girl in surprise from under the shimmering glasses of his glasses. "I don't get it," was all he could ask. "Pardon me, but you must be the son of the owner of this house, aren't you?" Emily answered the question with a question. "I just can't get used to how many rules there are around here. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about them before I meet Harry." The young man continued to stare at the maid in mute amazement. She, not knowing what to do in such a delicate situation, just stood there staring back at him. Finally, the man couldn't stand it any longer and laughed loudly. Emily felt incredibly stupid, but still managed to squeeze out a weak smile in response. "Honestly, I've never had one of those before," he said through his laughter and stepped close to Emily. The girl instantly blushed, not knowing if she could even take a couple steps away from him. The master's son came so close that Emily could feel the fabric of his developing shirt with her hand. "Emily, that's your name, isn't it? Did Mia say it right?" he asked with a playful smile. "Yes, that's correct." She looked up at him again. "Now, Emily, the master of the house isn't coming here for the simple reason that he's already standing in front of you. I'm Harry." Emily both stood and froze with her mouth open in amazement. The young man, however, moved his glasses back over his eyes without another word, and then strode away with a smooth gait toward the stairs leading to his private wing. Without turning around, he tossed her a final glance. "I like you, Emily. You are now definitely accepted. Please tell Mia that, and also ask her to drop in on me when she has a spare moment." With those words, he disappeared, leaving Emily in a semi-conscious state of excitement. Emily told her landlady that her master was waiting for her. She pressed her lips together and escorted the girl into the back room, where she gave her all the clothes she needed, the key to her room, and said, "Remember, we rise at 0600 so no one will see or hear you. And no matter how embarrassing it may be to you, you must continue to do your job. Do you understand?" "Understood," Emily muttered, thoroughly embarrassed, and went to change into her room. And so the girl's workday began. Very soon Emily realized what Mia meant when she talked about Harry's whims. It turned out that he loved to organize magnificent masquerade parties with a lot of music, beautiful women, and exquisite drinks. Besides Emily herself, there were about 15 other people working in the house, and they all acted as if they were mute and invisible objects in the mansion. It was certainly unusual for the girl to see all the house staff avoiding attention, as if they were walking underwater, avoiding the shaking in a quiet pond. But Harry had made it clear that he was open to interacting with them like normal people. Mia, however, continued her strict rules of behavior, even after her master had invited her in for a chat. Emily couldn't do anything about it. She was paid a substantial advance in her first month of work, some of which she immediately transferred to her parents. Harry, however, remained a mystery to her. he could suddenly walk up and kiss one of the young ladies who worked in his park. They were twin sisters, and they tended the beautiful conservatory, but at the same time he never allowed himself any unnecessary liberties with her or them. On such occasions he had more experienced ladies to whom he assigned the role of mistresses. Among his constant companions, Sophie was particularly prominent. The red-haired beauty with long legs spent most of her time by Harry's side. In turn, he called her bride more and more often. From this, the entire staff of the house concluded that it is not far off the time when these young people will get married and the owner will have an official wife. However, there was another side to this eccentric rich man. Very often, especially in the evening, Emily saw a young man immersed in the affairs of his company. He spent hours on his papers, and sometimes Emily was sure that he was working all night long. At the same time, she had never heard him say a rude word to anyone in the household. What if one of the workers made serious mistakes? Then Harry always talked to him alone, in his office, without prying eyes. But his fiancée, Sophie, did not share this peaceful approach to the staff at all. She had a tendency to pick on the little things, to raise her voice at everyone around her, and especially at the young maids, including Emily, whom she often brought to tears. "Why are you hanging around here?" During working hours, she yelled at the girls. "Don't you have anything else to do? Look around: dust, dirt, carpets not vacuumed. And you at least take up your work, you idle ones. When Harry and I get married, I'll teach you how to do things. Mia's taught you so much, and you just don't listen. Look me in the eye when I'm talking." Sophie was like a tigress to the workers, already seeing herself as the full mistress of the house. The maids could barely contain themselves, trying somehow to endure her screams and shrieks. God forbid Harry should really marry that Sophie, one of the maids complained in the kitchen. "It won't be long before we're all finished," she added. "What on earth can she do to you?" Emily asked with a smile. "It's not like she's his wife yet. You're worrying for nothing." Lily looked at Emily and said with bitterness in her voice, "You just don't know her. Emily. She's not a woman. She's the epitome of jealousy and greed, only in high heels. And she'll fire us all. You bet she will. I mean, she's jealous of the owner of every plate. The other day she complained that we're too pretty, walking around the house and mollycoddling every little thing with our smiles," said Lily. Both girls, Lily and Emily, laughed amicably, realizing perfectly well how absurd the situation was. Especially when it came to someone like their master. "I really need this job," Lily continued sadly. "I have a young son staying in the village with my mom. I work here and send them money to keep him fed and clothed." "I understand," Emily responded. "I have parents in another town myself, always lived modestly. So this place is a real shot in the arm for me." Lily looked out the window at the full moon hanging over the horizon and smiled dreamily. "Harry is very nice to us," she whispered, as if in confidence. "He has his oddities, of course, but he's not at all as cruel as Mia says he is. I suspect that's the image she's given him among us, to make us work harder and not relax." "He does seem a little odd," Emily agreed, trying not to meet Lily's gaze lest she read in it the feelings Emily felt every time she remembered how close Dmitri Petrovich stood to her. And he's so young to own such a huge company. How did he accomplish all this? Emily asked. "Well, he inherited it 3 years ago," replied Lily simply. "He's had these oddities ever since the motorcades, the working tirelessly, strange habits." Really, Emily was genuinely surprised. "Well, yes. His father poisoned right at one of the business dinners. The police have never been able to figure out exactly who committed the crime. It's safe to say that the culprit is still at large, and Harry is very afraid that he might be the next victim." Emily was shocked. She couldn't even imagine that such a tragedy had occurred in the life of this seemingly so carefree and cheerful man. "I think," Lily continued, "that all these parties and fancies, like why he always takes our cook Alfie and one of the maids with him when he goes on business trips, are ways to distract himself from his personal drama. Harry loved his father dearly and apparently still can't come to terms with his loss, and his father's killers were never punished. Yes, it all seems to have affected him deeply," Emily said thoughtfully to herself. "Who would have thought that rich people could have more serious problems than ordinary people?" That night, for some reason, Emily couldn't sleep. Despite all her apparent prosperity, she kept thinking about Harry. What was he really like? Perhaps his whole image was nothing more than a mask that hid a more vulnerable and needy person. A few weeks later, what Lily was talking about happened. Harry was going on an important business trip and, as usual, had chosen his own company, his cook, Alfie, and his maid. To her great amazement, the latter turned out to be Emily herself. "What surprises you so much?" Harry asked with a slight chuckle. "I need someone I can trust completely. Someone who will keep an eye on the cleanliness of my room and what I eat during the trip. Sounds like nothing special to me." "Yes, but you don't know me at all," Emily objected. "It's not like I've been working for you guys that long. What if I can't handle it?" The young man's face took on a serious expression, and then he answered in a voice that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "Well, if you can't handle it, then you and I will have to part ways. Or we can do it right now, if you're not confident in your abilities. Especially since this is a business trip for you." "No, of course not." "Of course I'll go with you," Emily said with her lips pressed together. And how could she think this businessman could have a heart? If Lily was right about his worries over her father's death, he was either hiding them very well, or her friend was simply mistaken. How could a man willing to fire another man in 2 seconds have deep emotions? No, Emily shook her head as she walked out of the supervisor's office. Harry could be anything he wanted to be, but definitely not a man who was suffering and in need of comfort. When all their belongings were packed and Emily and Alfie were getting into one of the 2 large jeeps, she didn't yet know what lay ahead. In one jeep, she and the cook were riding in, and in the second jeep was Harry himself and his guard. "Oh, don't you worry so much, my dear Emily," Alfie said to Emily with a kind smile. "It's not the first year I've traveled like this with my master, and it's always been fine. It's only for a couple days, nothing to worry about." Emily answered the cook with a calm but detached smile. An uneasy feeling of foreboding still lived inside her. Glancing up at the upper windows of the mansion, she thought she saw a familiar silhouette flashed in Harry's study. For a tiny fraction of an instant, Emily thought she saw someone's fiery red hair in the window. But it simply couldn't be true. Sophie had left the other day for some overseas resort and wasn't due back for another week at the earliest. "It's probably all your imagination," Emily said to herself. "You should read less detective stories at night." With these thoughts, the girl got into the car. At first the road was smooth, and the way through the lush forest seemed to her even picturesque. But the closer they got to the wide stone bridge, the more bumps were encountered along the way. "The road here hasn't been repaired in a long time. You have to be especially careful here," Emily's driver explained. "You don't have to explain," the girl nodded, remembering her father's tragedy. The driver wanted to add something else, but suddenly his attention was drawn to what was happening up ahead. Harry's car, which had always been considered one of the most reliable, suddenly started zigzagging down the road. "What the hell is going on up there?" the driver barely had time to utter when the car that was ahead uncontrollably crashed uncontrollably into the bridge railing and fell noisily into the water. Harry cried out, Emily in horror. And at the same instant their car began to repeat the leader's dangerous maneuvers. "What happened?" asked Alfie in lostness, whose eyes expressed great consternation. "Don't jinx it," Alfie shouted the driver, trying convulsively to hold the wheel. "I had a full inspection last week, didn't I? What the?" He didn't have time to finish his sentence because their Jeep, unable to slow down, followed the example of the boss's car and plummeted into the river wave with a crash. Emily couldn't remember exactly how she'd gotten underwater, just a protective reflex, and the girl opened her eyes, being already several meters submerged in the deep abyss. The cabin was completely flooded. This she realized at once. Next to her, with his eyes wide open, sat Alfie. Blood was oozing from a wound on his temple, and Emily realized bitterly that the poor man had evidently been struck when the car fell. He was as dead as the driver, who almost immediately choked to death from the powerful torrent of water. Being an excellent runner, Emily had good lung capacity, so she managed to get out of the Jeep fairly quickly. She looked, trying to find the second car in the murky water. Finally, she saw Harry's car was buried up to its hood in the mud, sinking to the bottom of the river. After a few more meters, she saw Harry, or rather, his arms floating in the water, for which she grabbed him and began dragging him upward, away from the flooded car. With great difficulty, Emily managed not only to pull her boss up, but also to drag him to the shore, and from there to the nearest road. There, Emily was able to stop the first car she could find and call an ambulance. Until the medics arrived, the girl gave the victim all the necessary in such cases a set of resuscitation measures. She, still on the shore, felt Harry's pulse, and making sure that he was alive, tried to pump out most of the water from his lungs. Although enough water was pumped out of the man, he never regained consciousness. Because of this, Emily had to literally carry him on her back to the nearest highway. Emily's lungs burned as if they were on fire. The girl's legs were shaking under her coughing, but she was determined to save Harry. When the ambulance finally arrived, Emily described the whole situation to them, and the paramedics guessed that there was something fishy going on. They called the police too. Emily and Harry were taken to the hospital, where they were given all the proper care. Since the girl was barely hurt, she was able to visit Harry after a few long hours that seemed like an eternity. The man, by then already recovered, thanked the girl profusely. "You said you couldn't handle it," he said in a hoarse voice. "You didn't just handle it, you kept me alive. And I can imagine what you had to go through while you dragged me through those woods. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm ashamed of myself for the way I pointed out your place." "Come on," Emily said. "The important thing is that you're breathing. My teachers at school told me I had a talent for running. I'm finally getting the hang of it. If I didn't run so much, I wouldn't be able to get you out." "Except what? My co-workers?" Harry asked her gloomily. "They're all dead," Emily said with a heavy heart. Harry nodded understandingly. "I don't understand what happened at all. The cars were in perfect working order. Of that I'm sure, Emily." Harry glared at his young savior. "What's the matter?" alarmed. "Are you ill? Shall I call a doctor?" "No," Harry stopped her. "No, it's not that." The young man reached into his jacket hanging on the chair and pulled a thick notebook out of the pocket, with a bordered uniform cover, inside of which was already a pre-prepared pen. "Here." He wrote something on a tiny scrap of paper, ripped it off, and handed it to Emily. "Now you're the only one I can trust." Emily, not understanding anything, took the paper from his hands. There were some numbers written on it, and the girl counted 10 of them. "But what are they?" she asked. "It's a code. Don't worry. It's not for the safe," Harry joked. "It's just for my work laptop. The computer is in my office, and I have an unusual favor to ask of you. Please. It will help me understand and solve a lot of things." Emily nodded, and after listening to her superior's request, she drove back home. An investigator came into Harry's room to question him about what had happened. The policeman assured the victim that they would do everything they could to find the perpetrators. The perpetrators. Harry couldn't believe his ears. Did that mean it wasn't a simple accident? "I'm afraid not," the policeman shook his head. "We've brought the cars up to the surface, and the preliminary examination leaves no room for comfort. Someone deliberately damaged your brake hoses, knowing that you would be driving in difficult road conditions." After saying these words, Harry slowly leaned back against the pillow. The realization that he was being chased made it hard for him to breathe. "Your competitors," the policeman clarified. "Forgive my impudence, but I'm aware of your father's case. As far as I know, they never found the culprits." Harry nodded briefly. "I think it was the same people," he said faintly, suppressing the same sense of fear he'd tried to drown out with alcohol over the years. At the same moment, Emily arrived at Harry's mansion and went up to his office, trying to be inconspicuous. She realized that her arrival had probably already been recorded by security, but she hoped for protection from Harry if security started asking questions. Emily turned on Harry's laptop and entered the password, which was 10 digits long. Immediately after entering the password, she accessed the desktop and opened the folder with the security footage. Selecting the desired date, she waited for the desired video to load. On the footage, she saw two people enter the garage, a red-haired woman in expensive shoes and the head of security whose job it was to protect Harry. They looked around and then damaged the brake hoses of the cars they planned to drive in. This discovery could significantly change the direction of the investigation, and Emily knew she needed to report everything to Harry. After watching the tape, an even more repulsive scene followed. A red-haired woman, whom Emily identified as Sophie, kissed her accomplice, after which both quietly left the garage. Emily urgently copied the video to a flash drive, closed and shut down her computer, and only then reported it to the police. When the investigators and SWAT team arrived at the mansion, the head of security was already packing his things, intending to flee abroad with Sophie. However, Sophie, convinced of Harry's death, decided to take all the treasures alone. She was apprehended at the airport as she tried to leave the country. The investigation revealed that Sophie was working for the same people behind the murder of Harry's father. Although Sophie did not personally kill anyone, she was promised a large percentage of the younger Harry's fortune if he died. She seduced the head of security and convinced him to arrange an accident for Harry. Now Sophie and the security chief faced the prospect of a lengthy imprisonment. In doing so, Sophie betrayed her former masters by agreeing to a plea bargain in exchange for a reduction in her own sentence. Her security lover will receive the maximum sentence. For complicity in the elimination of Harry's father to the heads of a rival company quickly enough got through the police, thanks to Sophie's confession. These turned out to be his father's longtime adversaries who wanted to take over his empire. Coming out of the hospital, Harry realized many things and changed his approach to life. He left empty parties and got rid of irrational rules in business. He gave his former fiancée Sophie a resignation and instead hired someone with the kindest heart, who easily found a common language with his staff and managed Harry's property without any confusion. Emily continued her work at the house, but she and Harry were now very close friends. Their shared story of saving his life brought them together, and that was just the beginning. 15 years later, the parking lot in front of the school, where Emily once attended, was extremely crowded. The parking lot was packed with cars down to the last space. So many people wanted to see each other again. After all, they had once all been classmates. Amelia had become much more lush and rounded than before. Whereas in her youth her fullness had seemed a nice addition to her charming appearance, now it clearly indicated a serious decline in her health, which Amelia apparently either ignored or denied. She barely fit in her thin, sparkling dress, apparently expecting rapturous shouts of admiration from her old school friends. But even those who had admired Amelia during her school days, and those who had only pretended to please her, were unable to appreciate her outfit on a decent level. This time, the excessive folds on her clothes made her look like something far less graceful. At that time, a large black limousine, sparkling with cleanliness, pulled up to the school building. Everyone in the auditorium, busily devouring salted pretzels, immediately rushed to the window. They were mesmerized by the intrigue who had arrived in such a luxurious car. When the car doors swung open to reveal the luxurious interior, the first to step out was a foot elegantly shod in soft suede boots. She was followed by a young and beautiful woman. Her slender figure possessed the healthy glow of youth, and the modest smile on her face involuntarily attracted stares like a magnet. "What's going on over there? What are you all staring at?" Amelia said impatiently. Pushing through the crowd and looking out the window, the woman ahed loudly, and then her face contorted with envy and anger. A few minutes later, Emily entered the hall, beautiful and blooming. Her classmates, dumbfounded, gazed at her gorgeous outfit, neatly styled hair, and discreet but high-quality makeup. No one could even imagine that Emily, who had been bullied during her school years, would not only retain her natural beauty and charm, but would turn into the most successful woman among them all. "Well, hello, Emily," Amelia shouted, extending her hand. "Not bad, you are so well settled. And how much do you pay the beautician? Or all in the old-fashioned way, cucumber?" Emily wasn't confused. "Hi, Amelia," she said calmly. "I just came by for a few minutes to see you all. Take another look at my past. And one last time to make sure I hadn't lost anything." Emily moved closer to Amelia and pointed to her neck. "You know, Amelia, you haven't changed one bit." Emily continued, enjoying the effect her words had on her teacher. "You're still just as naive and your jokes are just as tasteless." With those words, Emily looked Amelia over from head to toe and took one last look at the crowd of classmates, who seemed dull and lifeless, like peacocks that had lost their luster. Under the weight of anger, boredom, and time passed. She slowly made her way toward the exit, and before she left, she said, "You see, life always knows who has done how much good and evil. Someone dares to follow his star and gets a chance to become one of its rays, and someone remains empty, though shiny on the outside. A wrapper from which all the foil, alas, crumbles with time. Happy life to all of you," Emily said, walking down to the school doors. The classmates immediately turned around and looked back at the window. Harry stepped out of the car that was waiting for Emily outside, still as tall and stately as ever, but now wearing a pair of elegant glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was followed by two children, a boy about 12 years old and a girl about 4 years younger. The children threw themselves into Emily's arms excitedly, and Harry smiled, patting them on the head affectionately. Emily turned, and Harry gave her a long, full kiss, full of tenderness and love. After everything that had happened with the car falling into the river, he suddenly realized how different Emily was from all the women in his past. She was steadfast and undaunted, but at the same time gentle and modest, as beautiful as the most exquisite rose. She gave him everything he had dreamed of and more. When he proposed to her, she said yes, and it became the happiest day of his life. And 6 months after the wedding, when Emily announced that they were expecting a baby, Harry felt like he was finally not alone. Now they both had a chance to live the life they deserved, and no obstacles in the world could stop them. As their car drove away from the school, Amelia stayed inside the building. Emily didn't see Amelia throwing tantrums after they left, tearing her false hair out and cursing everything in the world, unable to understand why it was that Emily, the daughter of the school janitor, was able to achieve everything in life that Amelia thought should be hers. All she had was money, which never brought her happiness, and an alcoholic husband who married her only for a good place in her father's company. Time had not spared Amelia, and life had not added to her wisdom. All this she realized now, when it became obvious to her that it was probably too late to change anything. But it is so often the case that people only come to certain conclusions when circumstances no longer make them easy to apply. As she stood in the empty hall, maybe for the first time she thought seriously about her life, about its real values, and the opportunities she'd missed by being trapped in her illusions and chasing the wrong priorities.